Welcome to the Psychology World podcast. I'm Connor Whiteley, bringing you psychology news, articles, and other interesting psychology-related articles. Where I can find the podcast notes and more interesting psychology-related things, and you can get your free 8 psychology book box set at connorwhiteley.net. Now let's get on to the show.
Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 186 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, and today's episode is on how ADHD affects psychotherapists, and it is Friday the 6th of January 2023 as I record this. So happy new year everyone. I hope that you all had a wonderful break. And in today's episode, I really want to focus on how does ADHD affect a therapist in the sense that I truly believe that anyone who has a mental health condition can still achieve great things given the right support and the right scaffolding. And that's something that I talk about in today's episode. But so many people don't believe that people with ADHD could possibly become therapists, and that's something else that I talk about in today's episode. So if you want greater awareness about the condition and psychotherapists as a general, then this is a great episode for you, and I really enjoyed this. So moving on to the psychology news section, well, the British Psychological Society Research Digest is still on hiatus, so I haven't got any new news from them. But I did find in my email drafts the other day, this is a really good one, from October 2021. So that's what we're going to be reading from today. So the first one is, scared of spiders? There's an app for that. Specific phobias are incredibly common. According to estimates, around 3 to 15% of people will develop one in their lifetime, the vast majority of whom won't seek treatment. Phobias can manifest a huge number of stimuli, such as lightning, dentists, and most commonly animals, such as spiders. Although exposure therapy is well established and is very effective at reducing fear and anxiety in those with specific phobias, not many end up accessing treatment. Unsurprisingly, the certainty of being exposed to terrifying things doesn't entice many people. Even those who do make it into a therapeutic setting are also quite likely to drop out due to the extreme fear caused by these controlled exposures. However, modern technology may help us to sidestep these issues entirely. A new study suggests the solution might lie in augmented reality. So this I think is a really good one though, because augmented reality, I definitely think it's come quite a long way in the past few years, because if you do certain Google searches and certain Amazon searches, then these apps use augmented reality to help you try new things on. For example, an old friend of mine, she wanted to get some cats, and her Google search allowed her to look at and see what these particular cats that she wanted would look like in her own home. So that I thought was really interesting. And now if we can apply augmented reality in a therapeutic way, then that can only possibly be a good thing. And I do talk about this in my gamification book coming out later in the year. But there's a lot of applications for this augmented reality, virtual reality, when it comes to psychotherapy. So this is definitely a space to watch. It's definitely exciting, and yeah, it's a lot of fun if we open our minds up to the possibilities. And the second one is a Jekyll and Hyde emotion. Research on anger digested. At times it feels that the world is awash with anger, from the streets of a Taliban-controlled Afghanistan to any form of social media you'll care to mention. Anger and outrage are seemingly everywhere. New research helps to reveal why this is. It also reveals anger to be itself a Jekyll and Hyde emotion. If we can rid ourselves of the darkness, the destructive side, what is left can act as a force for good. So I won't go into the actual article too much, but I do quite like this concept because anger, traditionally and to be honest, most of the time it is a very negative emotion because it can drive you to be quite destructive. It can make you lash out, get angry, shout at people, scream at people, etc. So overall, it is a very negative thing because it can also lead to stuff like violence, etc. But if we take a step back and if we actually think about how anger could be used positively, then there are actually quite a few applications which I at least think are quite fascinating. Because if you get angry, for example, about the negative impact of human activity on the environment, then that could prompt you to do something positive for the environment, and maybe you might recycle more, or you might do something to help protect the environment. Equally though, if you get angry about the decreased access of a abortion, then that might prompt you and that might motivate you to help protect abortion in some sort of way though. For example, you might, I have no idea, I'm just doing this off the top of my head, but you might donate to a abortion clinic or some sort of charity. So that sort of thing though. So anger can be very negative, but it can also motivate us and it can also make us do stuff, form a force of good. So a very interesting concept and something that's definitely good to think about. So the last one is, we're more likely to steal from large groups than from individuals. We're all aware of the financial disparity that plagues our economic systems. And to be honest, I think this was written in 2021. I think it's just as applicable in 2023. Many of those at the top of larger corporations seem content to exploit large groups of people for their own significant financial gain. Strangely, this is somewhat at odds with a previous research in behavioral economics, which tends to find that people are generally quite prosocial, honest, and overall unwilling to steal considerable amounts from others. From results like this, it seems difficult to piece together exactly how we've arrived at such levels of financial inequality. Psychologists have floated a number of potential explanations for this phenomenon. Perhaps those who end up rich have innately higher levels of psychopathy, for example. Or perhaps it's the case that the cultural norms within certain businesses change the way people make economic decisions. However, new research suggests an alternative explanation. When it comes to acting selfishly, we are more likely to do it at a grand scale than a smaller one. Now this, I think, is a fascinating idea, because the article is right in its most basic form though, because no one likes stealing, everyone is quite pro-social at the end of the day, and yeah, and I forget the quote though, but it's something like 51% of humanity is a good, 49% of it is a bad, showing that overall humans are actually quite good. And that's what the research reports. So it does make you wonder, why is there such a financial inequality, and why does it why does it exist, as well as why aren't people doing more about it to try and fix it? So it's interesting, and the very idea that people prefer to steal at a larger scale, I can understand where it's coming from, because of course this is backed up with research, but you do tend to feel more guilty if you steal from one person. But if you steal from lots of people, then I suppose you can come up with some reasons like, oh yeah, if that group was better, then they would have realised that I'm stealing from them. And it probably connects with in-groups and out-groups, and that sort of innate conflict in our social world. So very interesting, lots of ideas on that. So I hope you enjoy the psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal updates. So moving on to the personal updates. Because it's been quite a while since I've recorded a personal update, there's actually not a lot to report though, because of course it was mainly Christmas, New Year, and I was relaxing. But Christmas was wonderful. We're seeing other friends and family, having plenty of food and presents. That's always nice. But I do really, really, really recommend Wonder Woman 1984, because in the last week of the year I always tend to watch films and game movies. Well, the legal ones. Yes, and stuff like that though. So the last week of the year I always tend to relax. Rest of the year I go crazy, and I just have lots of fun though, because I really do like to get a lot of stuff done though, which is what I've been doing this first week of the year. I've got tons done, and I'm really, really pleased though. So lots of projects, I can't talk about them yet because they're for lots of different things, and all of them are psychology related, but it's a lot of fun though. And in terms of funner stuff, I can officially say that a brand new project has launched for me, and it's actually launching today on the 6th. So, from all major ebook retailers, and you can get the paperback on Amazon, you can now buy issues of the Psychology World magazine. So, what this is that it's my own magazine. So in each issue, it contains 5 blog posts from the past, and one a psychology book that was released previously, but it also contains a brand new psychology book that won't be released for another 2 weeks individually. For example, issue 1 comes out today, and the brand new book in it is the careers in psychology book, which goes into tons of great information about careers in psychology. And I won't talk about it too much because that's actually the sponsored product for today's episode. But another reason why I'm talking about it is that if you want tons of books and tons of psychology information in a cheaper format compared to buying the books individually, then you might want to check out the Psychology World magazine. So as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment of the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi-whiteley. I always love to hear from all of you because it always makes the podcast feel more like a conversation. And you can leave a comment on the Facebook post at Connor Whiteley, psychology author. And today's episode has been sponsored by Careers in Psychology. So right now, but this book is actually on a pre-order, but it will be released on the 20th of January 2023. But you can get it in issue 1 of the Psychology World magazine. So the reason why this is a great sponsor for today's episode is because Careers in Psychology really does help you to understand what different careers are possible. Because I had no idea there were so many different careers in psychology, from academia, experimental psychology, business psychology, forensic and clinical psychology. There are so many great and, to be honest, quite fascinating areas where you could possibly work in the future, or if you ever want a career change. So it really is fascinating, and it does cover so many areas of psychology in quite a lot of depth. As well as it goes into what are these areas, what sort of skills do they acquire, and how might you go around actually getting this job though. So this is such an eye-opening book, written in an engaging conversational way, that I highly recommend it. So whether it's Careers in Psychology, available from all major ebook retailers, and you can order the paperback and hardback versions from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. And if you didn't want to buy a book but you still wanted to give the podcast a bit of one-time support, then you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/ConWhiteley. So now the personal update's done, let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the content part of today's episode. So I'm going to be talking about how ADHD affects therapists. So for me, this is such a brilliant podcast episode because I really did want to explore this topic. Mainly because of this is such a positive, quite hopeful, and really inspiring podcast episode. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. A brief introduction to ADHD. I've spoken about ADHD on the podcast a few times now, but in case you're new to the condition, we need to quickly talk about it. Since ADHD is often misunderstood in our society, because even the name is a massive oversimplification, because ADHD people don't have an attention deficit per se. Instead, they have a difficulty in controlling their attention, as well as ADHD impacts and impairs a person's motivation, memory, focus, processing speed, emotion processing, reward response, and more. Therefore, it can be said that people with ADHD don't have the biological tools that other people do, so that they struggle to use these processes effectively depending on the situation. As well as it isn't helpful at all that the truth around ADHD is often muddled up with tons of disinformation on the internet, so that the general public finds it hard to understand what ADHD involves. For example, most people have no idea that ADHD includes hyperfocus, which, for the sake of ease, you could possibly compare it to an intense focus, like an obsession, and not a child bouncing off the walls. Equally, ADHD can include behaviours like fidgeting with a pen, racing thoughts, or making impulsive shopping decisions. But of course, no one really thinks about these behaviours because they aren't as flashy and loud as other facets of ADHD. Therefore, now that we know what ADHD is, how can this impact therapists that have the condition? How ADHD impacts therapeutic skills. To be honest, a therapist is nothing or not very good if they don't have therapeutic skills, and these are the skills that they learn about in their training. For example, micro skills like body position and eye contact. Yet therapists also will have to learn about things like cues towards the client, like encouragement and nodding, as well as macro skills like reflecting on the meaning of something. In addition, therapists learn the importance of these skills because they help to make a safe and comfortable space for the client. Of course, most of these skills are very coachly and client dependent, but in many Western cultures, therapists are encouraged to maintain eye contact and encourage clients to do most of the talking. However, for therapists with ADHD, it can be difficult for them to process information whilst holding eye contact. Therefore, sadly, people with ADHD are often moaned at because they appear rude or not paying attention, when in reality, they are actually taking in a lot more information than other people believe, as well as reflecting in a depth that can be difficult for people with ADHD, as they tend to speak about things in ways that others might do as tangential. Sorry, I cannot say that word for the life of me. And to be honest, I think this is a great shame on the part of other people to some extent, because people with ADHD can be therapists. They can be taught the skills and knowledge and have the practical skills needed to help improve lives and decrease psychological distress. Yet, because of their condition, they might have to behave differently in front of clients, like the lack of eye contact, which is misinterpreted, so the therapist with ADHD gets criticised for, to be honest, absolutely no reason. Maybe more open communication would be helpful here, but this is still sort of problematic, unfortunately. How ADHD impacts focus. I think this is the clearest concern or difficulty for therapists with ADHD, because therapists have to focus on and think about another person's thoughts, feelings and emotions, all of us trying to pull out their meaning and make connections. This requires an awful amount of focus, and even writing out that paragraph, I was sort of struggling and I was sort of like, wow, that's a lot. And I also felt a bit tired of just like writing it out. But then a therapist might have to do all of this for up to an hour, multiple times a day. And this actually reminds me of a conversation I was having with a lecturer last year about how he's almost glad occasionally to have clients drop out of therapy because it gives him an hour break and an hour to catch up on paperwork. As a result, with ADHD in attention control, this kind of focus would take even more energy for a person with ADHD. As well as it can mean that the therapist ends up fighting against their own brain without any common coping mechanisms like background noise or something as simple as a fidgeting. Therefore, this can cause a lot of anxiety for the therapist, and this is before we even add to their natural concern about missing something important that the client said. How ADHD impacts organizational skills. As we all know from our studies on real-life work experience, the work of a therapist just doesn't end at the end of a therapy session. I wish it did, and I think most of this podcast does, but it doesn't. Since the therapist has to write up notes, plan a future session, schedule clients, and all of these tasks involve a lot of executive functioning to help the person stay on track. And to be honest, this might not sound too bad if it was just one person, but when we consider that a therapist might have a caseload of 20 to 30 clients, then this is a lot. This is a lot of scheduling, a lot of planning, and more to do each a week. And this is before you take into account the therapist's own personal life events, and more. This all increases the likelihood of a therapist, let alone a person with ADHD, mixing up or forgetting information or certain details. Of course, this is going to add stress and anxiety for therapists with ADHD, and this only adds to the list of things that they have on their mind whilst they work, basically already adding to a very full plate. Benefits of ADHD for therapists. Now, I do want to return to a point I always try and make on the podcast. If a client or yourself has a mental health condition, you will face difficulties. I will never ever deny that, but people with mental health conditions can be supported, helped, and most of the time they can live a fairly clinically normal life, because I hate the word normal, given the right support. And that is absolutely true for people with ADHD who want to become therapists. I truly believe that, and there are two major benefits of having ADHD if a person wanted to work in clinical psychology. How ADHD benefits empathy for therapists. Interestingly, people with ADHD generally experience more intense emotions than neurotypical people and others without the condition. This is particularly useful because one of the many roles of a therapist is to think about a client's feelings and use their own personal reaction to those feelings as a tool for helping the client deal well with them. Therefore, if a therapist has ADHD, then they're more likely to experience stronger reactions, and this can make it easier for them to access these tools in a therapy session. Of course, it's important for a therapist with ADHD to ensure their strong emotions don't flood them, but when a therapist can use their more intense emotions effectively, then this could be a very powerful tool to not only help the client, but connect and strengthen the therapeutic alliance as well. How ADHD benefits creativity for therapists. ADHD can be a great benefit for people because it increases creativity, and this is often referred to as divergent thinking, and the condition makes it easier for people to think outside the box and to come up with solutions, which is flat out critical in clinical psychology because sometimes there are clients that have such a range of factors that maintaining their maladaptive coping mechanisms that therapists really need to think outside the box to help them, as well as if traditional approaches don't work for a particular client, then a therapist who thinks quickly and creatively is the best here, and that is the perfect for a therapist with ADHD. Conclusion. Moving beyond the stigma. I sort of realise now after 186 episodes of the podcast, one of my missions with the podcast is empowerment. The empowerment of not only you as the listener to do whatever you want in psychology, but also the empowerment of all of those with a mental health condition, because it doesn't define them. And this is the entire point of today's podcast episode, because if you or someone you know has ADHD, loves psychology and wants to become a psychologist, then they could. It will be more difficult for them, but then some aspects will also be easier for them too. The real problem, I believe, is that there is so much stigma and misinformation about ADHD, and the obstacles that people with ADHD face are very easy to overlook, and it is this overlooking that can make daily life trickier, resulting in people internalizing these struggles as something to be ashamed of, like they're messed up and they couldn't possibly achieve anything meaningful in life. Instead, this only means that they think differently to people without the condition. However, I do truly believe that people with ADHD can become therapists, and these people will require support, but it is possible. A therapist with ADHD might need to find a subtle way to fidget during the session to help them focus. They might want to engage in therapeutic models outside the traditional cognitive behavioral therapy approach, like a play therapy, to help them maintain their focus better, as they aren't sitting in an office and they're actually doing something a little physical. Or the therapist might want to ask a peer for them to take notes together. It's important to adapt to the ways the ADHD brain works instead of forcing all therapists to work in the exact same way. ADHD obstacles are real, and they're exhausting, but it doesn't mean a person that cannot thrive, achieve great things, and help people, just like a neurotypical therapist does. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. And to be honest, when I realised that the whole point of this podcast is actually in empowerment, I was really pleased because it's true. I want you to live your best life. I want the clients we help. I want anyone with a mental health condition to live their best possible life. I know that's a very big ambition, but if I can even help one person, then that is a massive thing, and I will be really, really pleased. So, if you know someone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And please check out Careers in Psychology, available in all the usual places. It's a great book and it's really useful. But if you didn't want to buy a book, but you still wanted to give the podcast a bit of like one-time support, then you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Con Whiteley. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see the show notes, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. And if you want a free 8-book psychology box set, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.